But thank you for listening.
Yep. Thank you for the commiseration. Here's the thing. Theme.
Ah,
Okay, you see this, Bruce?
yeah.
Okay, we're going to talk about loneliness. And these are just pictures I picked up of what it might mean to be lonely.
Right.
So here we go. So
We have a
loneliness.
very good video of Young talking about loneliness for later.
Yeah, yeah. So loneliness is an unpleasant emotional response to perceived isolation. Loneliness is also described as social pain, psychological mechanism that motivates individuals to seek social connections. It's often associated with a perceived lack of connection and intimacy. So loneliness overlaps, and yet it is distinct from solitude. Solitude is simply the state of being apart from others. Not everyone who experiences solitude feels lonely. As a subjective emotion, loneliness can be felt even when a person is surrounded by other people. So
Or a
I
special.
think loneliness is something that everyone at some point in their life experiences.
Well, actually, I never have.
You never have.
Well, you
Never
were a
have.
twin.
Well, you were, and plus you've got all these connections to the Dalai Lama, and so you couldn't possibly ever be lonely, right? Just need to,
Well, he's
Yeah.
immersed in the wonder.
yeah,
I'm not sure exactly why. And the other emotion I've never felt is jealousy.
jealousy.
I've never experienced
Mhm.
jealousy or loneliness.
So,
Well,
Anyway.
that's worth knowing. So the
But
causes.
anyway,
Go ahead.
carry on.
Okay, the causes of loneliness are varied. Loneliness can be a result of genetic inheritance, cultural factors, a lack of meaningful relationships, a significant loss, and excessive reliance on passive technologies such as the internet. So you're just always staring at the screen, or a self-perpetuating mindset. So research has shown that loneliness is found throughout society among people in marriages, along with other strong relationships and those with successful careers. Most people experience loneliness at some points in their lives, and some feel it often. So loneliness is found to be highest among younger people. According to the BBC Loneliness Experiment, 40% of the people within the age group of 16 to 24 admit to feeling lonely, while those who feel lonely above age 75 is around 27%. So big drop. So the effects of loneliness are also varied. Transient loneliness, or loneliness that exists for a short period of time, is related to positive effects, including an increased focus on the strength of one's relationships. And chronic loneliness, loneliness that exists for a significant amount of time in one's life, is generally correlated with negative effects, including increased obesity, substance abuse, substance use disorder, risk of depression, cardiovascular disease, risk of high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. Chronic loneliness is also correlated with an increased risk of death and suicidal thoughts. So pretty grim. Medical treatments for loneliness include beginning therapy and taking antidepressants. Social treatments for loneliness generally include an increase in interaction with others, such as group activities, such as exercise or religious activities, re-engaging with old friends or colleagues, owning pets, and becoming more connected with one's community. So loneliness has long been a theme in literature, going back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. Academic coverage of loneliness was sparse until recently. In the 21st century, some academics and professionals have claimed that loneliness has become an epidemic, including Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General of the United States. I think he just stepped down. So, how to bear loneliness? You're born alone. You die alone. value of space in between is trust and love. This is what the artist Louise Bourgeois wrote in her diary. How much trust and love we wrest from life and lavish upon life is largely a matter of how well we've befriended our existential loneliness. Fundamental fact of every human existence that coexists with our delicate interconnectedness, each a parallel dimension of our lived reality, each pulsating beneath our days. So she wrote in this book, Pema Chodron, who was a Buddhist teacher, when things fall apart, heart advice for difficult times. She explores what it takes to cultivate a non-threatening relationship with loneliness and to transmute it into a different kind of relaxing and cooling loneliness that subverts our ordinary terror of the existential void. That's true. There are people that are terrorized of just what they think of as the void of existence. So, how to bear loneliness? When we draw a line down the center of a page, we know who we are if we're on the right side and who we are if we're on the left side. But we don't know who we are when we don't put ourselves on either side. And then we just don't know what to do. We just don't know. We have no reference point, no hand to hold. And at that point, we can either freak out or settle in. So contentment is a synonym for loneliness. Cool loneliness, settling down with cool loneliness. We give up believing that being able to escape our loneliness is going to bring any lasting happiness or joy or sense of well-being or courage or strength. Usually we have to give up this belief about 1 billion times, again and again, making friends with our jumpiness and dread, doing the same old thing 1 billion times with awareness. Then without our even noticing, something begins to shift. We can just be lonely with no alternatives, content to be right here with the mood and texture of what's happening.
I don't understand how contentment and loneliness are the same. I don't see that. Do you?
I think, see, they're calling it cool loneliness, contentment.
Well, to me, that is what I would call solitude, which can be extremely enriching and
Mhm.
rich and
Yeah.
different from loneliness. To me, loneliness is a kind of ache that an emptiness that you want to fill
Right.
or distract yourself from. Whereas if you're feeling content, then I don't think you're feeling that something is missing.
Yeah,
because
that's what I was looking at. The first part here deals with there's no reference point or no hand to hold, and so you're lonely. You're just floundering here. And then they go into contentment, but contentment isn't the same as having no reference point. In fact, no reference point to me means you're lost. You're floundering. You're lonely. You're out in this void. So let's see what else happens here. In Buddhism, all suffering is a form of resistance to reality, a form of attachment to desires and ideas about how the world should be. By befriending our loneliness, we begin to meet reality on its own terms, to find contentment with the as is nature of life, complete with all of its uncertainty. So we're fundamentally alone. There's nothing anywhere to hold on to. Moreover, this is not a problem. In fact, it allows us to finally discover a completely unfabricated state of being. Our habitual assumptions, all our ideas about how things are, keep us from seeing anything in a fresh, open way. We don't ultimately know anything. There's no certainty about anything. This basic truth hurts, and we don't want to run away from it. But coming back and relaxing with something as familiar as loneliness is good discipline for realizing the profundity of the unresolved moments of our lives. So that's where it comes back to this unresolved moments, where you're saying, am I on the right side of the page or the left side of the page? And you don't know where you're at. So we're cheating ourselves when we run away from the ambiguity of loneliness. That's what he thinks. She thinks. So faced, loneliness becomes a kind of a mirror, one into which we must look with maximum compassion, one that beams back to us our greatest strength. Cool loneliness allows us to look honestly and without aggression at our own minds. We can gradually drop our ideals of who we think we ought to be, or who we think we want to be, or who we think other people think we want to be or ought to be. We give it up and just look directly with compassion and humor at who we are. Then loneliness is no threat, and heartache no punishment. Cool loneliness doesn't provide any resolution or give us ground under our feet. It challenges us to step into a world of no reference point without polarizing or solidifying. This is called the middle way, or the sacred path of the warrior. So loneliness is the fundamental condition of life. We're born by one another, but born alone. We die around others if we're lucky and loved, but we die alone. We spend our lives islanded in our one and only human experience in these particular bodies and minds and circumstances drawn from the cosmic lottery amid the immense ocean of time and chance teeming with all possible experience. So everything of beauty and substance that we make, every poem, every painting, every friendship is an outstretched hand, reaching out from one loneliness to another, reaching into the mute mouth of forever for the vowels of a common language, to howl our requiem for the evanescent now. But despite being so fundamental, or precisely because of it, loneliness is fractal. The closer you look at the granularity of life, the more you see it branching into myriad lonelinesses, which, like the kinds of sadness, all have different emotional hues. So the loneliness of feeling invisible or misunderstood, bottomless and bone-chilling as the Scottish fog, the loneliness of seeing what others look away from, remote and shoreless as a lighthouse, the loneliness of public humiliation, a red-hot iron rod, the loneliness of your most private failure, inky and arid like the desert air at night, the loneliness of success, shiny and sharp as obsidian, and the loneliness of love, lightless as the inside of a skull. So these are all types of loneliness. Let's see. Any one of those grab you?
I'm not finding this helpful.
Well, this is what this Pima Chodron thinks
I
are
don't.
types of loneliness. I'm not defending this. I'm just saying. So,
Well, it's worth exploring because she's,
yeah,
attempting to articulate something and, examine it. You have different categories. But to me, the word loneliness implies some, at least dissatisfaction, if not pain. Whereas the other possibility in my mind is solitude, which I learned to just savor, and which really changed my life. And I used to be a compulsive reader, and I think that was the kind of
when you're reading, you're doing it by yourself.
right. But I think that was a way of filling up that empty space. And then I learned to just be in it and enjoy cooking by myself and eating by myself. I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable eating by themselves.
A lot of people go out to restaurants just so they can have people around them, have
Right.
noise.
And my life changed when I learned to really savor it and enjoy it. So I can't put those words together. To me,
I understand.
solitude is a positive experience, and loneliness, it's not the end of the world or anything. You don't have to avoid it. But loneliness isn't really, to be a positive association.
Right. So now we turn to this book, Inner Gold by Robert Johnson. Inner Gold, Understanding Psychological Projection. So Robert Johnson is a Jungian analyst, and he groups all the possible loneliness into three core kinds that pulsate beneath our daily lives and govern our search for love. The past-oriented loneliness of missing what once was and never again will be. The future-oriented loneliness of longing for what could be, but has not come to pass. And then finally, what he calls the profound loneliness of being close to God. So this I take to mean the existential disorientation of feeling your transience press against the edge of the eternal. Your smallness press against the immensity that dwells at the intersection of time, chance, and love. God is just what some call their dream of a crosswalk when they face that intersection. That's interesting. God is just what some call their dream of a crosswalk when they face that intersection. So the first two lonelinesses are rooted in time, the past and the future, which itself is fractal. There are many kinds of times we live with. But the third kind of loneliness deals not with the temporal, but with the eternal. It exists outside of time, like music. Well, that's the problem. The problem with the present is that you have the past, which is always receding, and the future, which you're coming up on. But the present is the strange in-between time where you're there in the here and now. So you don't deal this doesn't deal with temporal, but with eternal thoughts. It exists outside of time, like music, like wonder, like love. It's an existential loneliness or a creative loneliness that made not from the atoms of now that compose the other two loneliness, but from the atoms of forever. Well, because we, creatures made of time, cannot comprehend forever, it's easy to call it God, that catch-all for everything immense and incomprehensible that we face in ourselves. But this is an illusion. Forever, too, is fractal, with myriad visitations of it in our daily lives, and a testament to James Baldwin's timeless insistence that the poets are finally the only people who know the truth about us. It is not the psychologists or the philosophers, but the poets who part the veil of illusion to reveal the truth. I agree, poets are different, but so here are some kinds of forever visit you by Brendan Hillman. The unknown, this is a poem here. So since we're talking about poets.
I wonder if she's related to James Hillman.
No idea. The unknowns are up early. They browse through the bronze porch bells. Crows call and late. Apples blaze toward western emptiness. In your illness, the edges hesitate like the revolt of workers. They will take a while. Here comes the fond, mild winter. Other realms are noisy. and unanimous. You tap the screen and dream while waiting for kinds of forever, visit you today, something, nothing, everything in art, greater than you are, and of your making. So there's a poem, some kinds of forever. So now we go to Marianne North, who died in 1890. She was 26 and had just lost her mother in a long, tortuous illness when her father took her to an oasis of wonder in the heart of London, Kew Gardens, one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, a lush affirmation of life bustling with life forms beyond the wildest imagination. In the majestic half-acre glass and iron palm house full of tropical plants, Marianne found a portal to another world. She fell under the spell of the exotic red Amherstia nobilis, one of the grandest flowers in existence, which made her long to see the tropics. She would recall a lifetime later, having obeyed the siren song of that longing and made of it a revolution. So over the next 3 decades, Marianne North would defy the central conventions of her era, an era in which women were expected to marry when neither permitted nor practically able to travel alone, had access to no formal education, neither art or science, and were excluded from scientific and artistic societies. She'd go on to traverse the world, painting the living world she saw, enduring storms and snakes, typhus and broken bones, unimaginable heat, and long stretches without access to clean drinking water. She visited Egypt and South Africa, Borneo and Sicily, India and California, Chile and Australia, immortalizing nearly 1,000 plants. Plants the vast majority of our species had never seen and would never see with their own eyes. Plants new to most botanists, and even some plants never before seen. So these are pictures, paintings that she made of these different plants. She spent her whole life traveling the world and painting pictures of plants. She painted unlike any other botanical artist of her time. Rather than isolated specimens rendered in pencil or watercolor, her plants came alive in oil amid the integrated context of their native ecosystems. In an era before photography was a portable instrument of science, the precisions of her paintings and their transportive power twined to make for a revolution in both botany and fine art. Enchanted by her work, Francis Galton and Charles Darwin came to see her as a peer and soon became close friends with her. So Marianne's first great creative love. What?
Move that picture out of the way. Thank you.
Was not art, but music. She trained to be a vocalist, but when her sonorous contralto voice broke her dreams along with it, she found an alternate portal to beauty in painting, widened with wonder by her passion for plants. But see, this is a very lonely thing. She's going out there all by herself, painting all these plants.
I think
Pictures.
art is lonely.
It is.
It's usually solitary. Maybe.
Yeah, that's one of the things people object to in mathematics is it tends to be very lonely. It's not a team sport. Her father, who never remarried, was the great champion and comrade of her calling. At their home in Hastings, he built 3 small greenhouses and populated them with exotic plants that sang to the young Marianne's imagination as she tended to them alongside her father. He was from first to last the one idol and friend of my life, she would later recall, and apart from him, I had little pleasure and no secrets. She vowed never to leave his side. After her sister married, father and daughter set out to travel Europe and the Middle East together, sharing a lively and generous curiosity and how other cultures live and what other lands are lush with. Taken with this never-ending series of wonders, Marianne captured what she saw in delicate and detailed watercolors. In 1868, a new vista of the imagination burst open when Marianne, almost entirely self-taught, received her first lesson in oil painting from one of Australia's most esteemed artists. She found it wildly addictive, a vice like dram drinking, almost impossible to leave off once it gets possession of one. It was also a revelation for botanical art because oil preserves pigment perfectly, whereas the traditionally used watercolor fades and yellows with time. That's interesting. But only a year after this creative awakening, Marianne was struck by the greatest loss of her life. Her father went to sleep and never again woke. She was overcome by a profound existential loneliness, feeling as though she'd been left entirely alone in the world. She would never cease grieving him. I have no love to give you or anyone. It is all gone with him, she would tell a suitor years later. Just like her contemporary Ernst Haeckel, who coined the word ecology, while turning his personal tragedy into transcendent art for science, Marianne leaned on the only consolation she knew, nature's steadfast beauty and the fragile, tenacious wonder of plants. She left Hastings forever, set out to visit all the lands that had enraptured her imagination ever since that long ago visit to Kew Gardens with her father. She never married. Wonder became her primary relationship. She traveled to America first, determined to capture its natural, abundant luxuriance, and was awed by the redwoods of California, making an impassioned and prescient plea to save them from destruction. Epochs ahead of the modern environmental movement, a century before Rachel Carson cautioned that the real wealth of the nation lies in the resources of the earth, the soil, the water, the forests, the minerals, and the wildlife. Marianne North sorrowed to see the quarrying and the chemicalizing of nature. It broke one's heart to think of man, the civilizer, wasting treasures in a few years to which savages and animals had done no harm for centuries. Yeah, the redwoods it was almost criminal what they did. On Christmas Eve, 1871, she arrived in Jamaica, the portal into the tropics of her dreams. She found herself wonder-smitten by the majestic palms, some of the Earth's most ancient tree species, and some of the most otherworldly. She found herself alone in friendliness. Here's another book she wrote over here that you can see. But everywhere she went, Marianne seemed to attract kindness and sympathy with the sincerity of her pursuit. Almost immediately, a young Cuban engineer appeared from the moon or elsewhere, helped her with her boat, and shepherded her to her next destination, where she was met with more friendliness from strangers. Even so, her days were mostly solitary, but filled with wonder. I was in a state of ecstasy, hardly knew what to paint first, she wrote in her diaries, collected in abundant beauty, the adventurous travels of Marianne North. For a year, she lived in a hut in the heart of the Brazilian rainforest, painting incessantly amid all these wonders, seeming to taunt us, mortals, for trespassing on fairies' grounds and to tell us they were unapproachable. So, assaulted by armies of Earth's most bloodthirsty ticks, she found them worth bearing for the sake of the many wonders and enjoyments of the life I was leading in that quiet forest nook. A life that was for her a series of wonders and endless beauties to be savored and celebrated in paint. In Java, she found a perfect world of wonders. Her passionate curiosity, amiable humor were always at her side. The lycopodiums were in great beauty there, particularly those tinted with metallic blue or copper color, There were even great metallic aurums with leaves 2 feet long, graceful trees over the streams with scarlet bark, all hanging in tatters, and such huge black apes. One of these watched and followed us a long while, seeming to be as curious about us as we were about him. When we stopped, he stopped, staring with all his might at us from behind some branch or tree trunk. But I had the best of that game. I possessed an opera glass and he didn't, so could not probably realize the whole of our white ugliness. Everywhere she went, she walked for hours into the wilderness, often without companions. Every day's ramble showed me fresh wonder, she wrote, what may be the single best summation of her life, and of any life well lived. When Marianne finally returned to England after many years of rambles, she wrote to Sir Joseph Hooker, the founding father of graphical botany and Darwin's closest friend, and the longtime director of Kew Gardens, and offered to donate her paintings, by them numbering several hundred, featuring plants wholly alien to European eyes. Hooker heartily agreed, and a dedicated gallery for her work was built at Kew Gardens, which Marianne herself funded and helped design. It's not bad. Kew Gardens is a great place. With her health failing, Marianne began composing an account of her extraordinary life, entrusting the manuscript to Hooker, by then her oldest friend. It was posthumously published in Recollections of a Happy Life. Today, several exotic plant species bear her name, including Nepenthes northiana, the tropical pitcher plant that was her greatest botanical infatuation, Areca northiana, which is a palm, Crinum northianum, also known as seashore lily or Asiatic poison lily, Conifophia northii, the vibrant red-hot poker beloved by gardeners, and Cassalia northiana, a blue-berried tropical plant only named in 2021, as well as the entire genus Northia, containing some of the Earth's most ravishing flowering plants, and so named by Hooker himself. To this day, the North Gallery at Kew Gardens remains the only permanent solo exhibition by a woman in Great Britain. Not too shabby. If the universe is, now we go to Annie Parson. Annie Parson says up here, the choreography of everyday life. If the universe is meaningless, so is the statement that it is so. Alan Watts wrote as he contemplated our search for meaning, the meaning and purpose of dancing is the dance. So in a fertile metaphor for the way we move through the world and how we move the world through the mind shapes our entire experience of it. Out of this existential choreography, which we perform a million times a day in a million unconscious ways, arises our perception of reality. The metaphor comes alive with uncommon vitality in the choreography of everyday life by Annie Parson, the choreographer, who has shaped living artworks by cultural icons, ranging from David Bowie and David Byrne to Mikhail Baryshnikov and the Martha Graham Dance Company. So here's someone who looks to dance and choreography, doing, you have a ballet dancer running across the stage. You're all by yourself, that is what it is. Reading the Odyssey is a kind of a secular theology and reckoning with TikTok, which is our app today, as the folk art form of our time. She turns a cautious eye to our menacing pandemic of selfing, observing the self-made corner into which we've punished ourselves. Social media forms are performative, solo forms. With an odd conflation of friendship and marketing, the body is alone in a room performing the self. with an undercurrent of desire for applause. Without a town square to gather in and hash out the day with neighbors, social media communications have a shading of loneliness underneath. The way out, she intimates, is movement, a movement of the spirit that mirrors the movement of bodies toward the togetherness of the town square, the place where generative change takes place for all creativity, which is the antidote to loneliness. Is a kind of a dance we perform, not in isolation, but with the world. The wide shot is the camera position that allows the audience to see the full body of everyone in the scene and their environment. It's the most objective and potentially most compositional of all camera positions. For very brief moments, I can perceive our wide shot. We experience contentment, then we suffer. We slog through what we deem uninteresting. We get inspired. We see things, we miss things. We trip or fall or slowly crumble. We get up, we fight, we reconnect. And then in despair or fascination or just reflexively, we write about it. So this desire to articulate what you feel and perceive, to tell it, to name it, to describe it, this is as natural as the progression from walking to running to leaping, to shaping that leap into a pattern of leaps, and then a group of leapers in unison into a dance. And if I go into the extreme wide shot, I can see a generative duality between us and the world, a reciprocity between us perceiving the world together through art, and the world in turn reading us through what we make. In this mirror structure, I can imagine the creative act as world actualization rather than self-actualization, that what we make becomes a part of nature's generative system. Now we go to Escher.
Who was saying that?
This is Annie Parson, who's the choreographer.
Okay.
Now we go to Escher. Here's one of Escher's pictures. You have fish down here and birds up here, and somehow they just merge. Go figure. Only Escher could figure this out. Escher on loneliness. If you write what you yourself sincerely think and feel and are interested in, Rachel Carson wrote as she contemplated the loneliness of creative work after her unexampled books about the sea made her one of the most beloved writers of her time. You'll interest other people. So write what you think will interest you, and this will get other people. She couldn't have known it then, but across the Atlantic, another visionary was drawing creative succor from her work while reckoning with the same blessed burden of the unexampled.
She wrote Silent Spring?
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. In the autumn of 1955, Escher, who lived from 1898 to 1972, he wrote to his son, a person who is lucidly aware of the miracles that surround him, who has learned to bear up under the loneliness, has made quite a bit of progress on the road to wisdom. So Escher spent his life trying to bear up under the loneliness of gift, the product of a rare mind best described, to use the notion alien to his epoch, as gloriously neurodivergent. His stunningly detailed lithographs, his meticulous woodcuts, his reality warping geometries, and astonishing tessellations and pleasantly unnerving defiances of gravity, partway between optical illusion and dream, were a hallmark of the lonely patience of creative work, which often left him feeling like a miserable fanatic, always wandering around in enigmas, afflicted by an association mania. So this is Escher. Like Carson, who was too lyrical for science and too scientific for literature, Escher inhabited two worlds as an outsider to both. He felt that scientists nodded politely at his mathematically inspired art in a friendly and interested manner, but considered him merely a tinkerer, while artists were primarily irritated by his unclassifiable graphic daring. From this betwixt and between place, he lamented to his son, It continues to be profoundly sad and disillusioning fact that I am beginning to speak a language these days only very few understand. It only increases my loneliness more and more. In the introduction to the 1957 book about his core creative obsession, Regular Divisions of the Plane, he painted himself as a vessel for some larger creative force, available to all but accessed only by the very few. So Escher says, I'm walking around all alone in the splendid garden that does not belong to me and the gate of which stands wide open for anyone. I dwell here in refreshing but also oppressive loneliness. That is why I've been attesting to the existence of this idyllic spot for years, without expecting many strollers to come, however. For what enthralls me and what I experience as beauty is often judged to be dull and dry by others. But for all his loneliness, Escher also saw himself as tasked with astonishment. Sometimes beauty is a nasty business, he wrote, and with rendering dreams, ideas, or problems in such a way that other people can observe and consider them. And this was enough. The sheer joy of his work assured him that he was on the right track. Work so unusual did not, however, or could not, be arrived at via the usual paths. For all the astonishing mathematical precision of his prints, Escher struggled ferociously with mathematics as a young student at the Harlem School of Civil Engineering and Decorative Arts. It wasn't until he heard Bach's Goldberg variations that his mind snapped into its own gift for rendering meaning through form. Father Bach, he called him. Wonder-smitten by Bach's music, by its mathematical figures and motives repeating back to front and up and down, by the majesty of a compelling rhythm, a cadence, in search of a certain endlessness, Escher felt in it a strong kinship, a special affinity between the canon and the polyphonic music and the regular division of a plane into figures in identical forms. So go figure. I wonder what he would have thought of about Philip Glass as a musician. Anyway, later Escher would come to regard his own work as a kind of small philosophy, one that has nothing to do with literary form philosophy. Philosophy only takes, I'm going to have to set off this fire, the smoke detector.
We take it outside. I'll do my best to carry on. The form that the literary form that philosophy ordinarily takes. Rather, his was a philosophy of pleasure and spaciousness. The compositional joy of arranging forms on a plane and giving meaning to each part of it. It has much more to do with music than with literature, he wrote. That makes sense, I think. What most enchanted him in Bach was the infinite variations of waves and undulations in his music. It spoke to something in his own soul that had not yet awakened. And then one day, while he was traveling through Italy, as he did throughout much of his 20s and 30s, it did, listening to his wife brushing her hair, Escher was reminded of the sound of waves and was suddenly overcome by an intense longing for the sea.
He'd always been curious about the marine world, fascinated by the fluid mass, by its creatures and its phenomena, especially the otherworldly wonder of bioluminescence. But this was a calling of a different order and a new urgency. He began taking voyage after voyage aboard cargo ships, mesmerized by the billowing trails the ships left on the water. He watched the flying fish on the deck. He filled his notebook with a private glossary of nautical terms. On land, he read everything he could about the ocean he could get his hands on, as it went on, tugging at his heart. He felt that only seasoned sailors understood this elemental yearning. You never, or very rarely, come across such people on land, he told his son. The swelling obsession eventually led Escher to Rachel Carson's The Sea Around Us, the lyrical book that had won her the 1951 National Book Award. Wonder-smitten with her writing, Escher wrote to his son, she describes that liquid element with an overview of all its associated facets and problems in such an enthralling manner, with precision and poetry, that it is driving me half insane. This is exactly the kind of reading material I, with my advancing years, need most, a stimulus from our Mother Earth for my spatial imagination. It's kindling in me intense inspiration to create a new print. He grew obsessed with rendering the blue fluidity of the liquid element in a static black and white image that sacrificed none of the feeling tone and dynamism of the living reality. Those waves. Soon I'm going to try once more to draw something wave-like. So if you look at this thing over here, this has kind of got waves in it, okay? He's trying to get at it. But how can you suggest movement on a static plane? How can you simplify something as complicated as a wave in the open sea to something comprehensible? So Carson's poetic, that scientifically scrumptious writing, rendered the wonder of the sea comprehensible, not by diminishing its enchantment, but by magnifying it with understanding, giving Escher a new way thinking about three-dimensional nature of space that had always animated his work, and making him consider for the first time the fourth dimension of time. Like Carson, who looked at the ocean and saw it in it, a lens on eternity and the meaning of life, he now saw the ocean as an antidote to the transience that marks our lives, an ever-flowing, ever-lapping salve for our terrified incomprehension of the finitude of time, which is always at bottom a terror of our own finitude. A human being is not capable of imagining that the flow of time could ever come to a standstill, even if the earth went to stop turning around its axis and around the sun. Even if there wouldn't be any more days and nights, any more summers and winters, time will continue to flow onward into eternity. That's how we imagine it. But like Carson, who found in music the concentration and consecration of her work, Escher never ceased slaking his soul on Bach. Many a print reached definite form in my mind while I was listening to the lucid, logical language he speaks, while I was drinking the clear wine he pours. Months after Rachel Carson's untimely death, Escher received an award with a reflection on his core creative ethos that is as true as hers. The consistency of the phenomena around us. So here's all the waves. He was capturing the waves here. This is an Escher. Around us, order, regularity, cyclical repetitions and renewals, brings me repose and gives me support. In my pictures, I try to bear witness that we're living in a beautiful, ordered world, not in chaos, without pattern, as it sometimes seems. After Carson's death, 2 original signed Escher prints were discovered among her belongings. In other words, Escher had given her 2 signed prints. In the final years of his own life, in a token of gratitude for how her work had touched his, he granted the posthumously assembled Rachel Carson Council permission to freely reproduce his prints in their advocacy of the sea for perpetuity. So go figure. Now here's someone else.
I just want to say, I think we should introduce a little more of who she was.
Yeah.
Because some people might have absolutely no idea. But
Yeah, no,
she was really one of the first champions of what we call ecology now.
right.
And she wrote a book called Silent Spring about what it would mean for nature to die. That was it was very scientific and very poetic and affected a lot of people. It was
Yeah, it led to the creation of Earth Day,
right.
which we just celebrated.
And I don't know how to put it. She was really kind of heroic. She was really
Yeah, she was
thinking of
doing this
large
really by
scale.
herself.
Right.
No one else was there. She was saying, no, you don't understand. You're destroying the world.
And for her, it was a really deep combination of science and art that she was moved to express this sense of meaning and loss in that um the earth is a living organism, and that we can affect it. It's not it's not beyond damage, it's not beyond harm. Although it's awesome and enormous, we can really hurt it. I don't know if we can destroy it, but we can certainly do a lot of harm. And she was talking about, well, what if we did manage to kill all the insects, which seems like a goal at times, but what would really happen if we had no crickets left, if we had no uh, locusts, I mean, yeah, we think of locusts as a terrible nuisance, but what would really happen if we silenced all of the insects? It would destroy the world, it would destroy the planet and everything in it. So that was her, um, the, the, the sort of title of the evocation of the implication of it, that we could have a silent spring and it would be the end of everything. And that we can't just control it and pave it and package it, because that will kill it. And it's something that's, extant and larger than us and so full of wonder. She really lived a life of wonder. She was devoted to the experience of wonder, which is in so many ways why it's worth living. And I think we do so much to inhibit wonder. And science does a lot. It can expand it or it can reduce the sense of wonder.
No, science only gives you how, it doesn't come up with why.
Right. And the deeper you question, as you often said, the more you realize how little you know, but you see more of the intricacy of it all. And to me, that enhances the sense of wonder and mystery. It's like, well, something's going on. I'm not saying there's some puppet master, sitting on a chair on a cloud, working it out with a slide rule and a protractor, and that's God, and that's what nature is. Who knows? It's a lot more mysterious than that. But I think they both had a sense of the fractal nature of it and how that scales up and scales down. Would you say
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
fair?
yeah. They had unique ways of looking at these things. This is a bunch of essays by Barry Lopez. And so it's called Embrace Fearlessly the Burning World. So he's just, this is essay after essay. So here's the first one. Place and a mind may interpenetrate till the nature of both is altered, said the great Scottish mountaineer and poet Nan Shepherd, as she reflected on the relationship between nature and human nature. So place and a mind may interpenetrate. But what we call place, that unalloyed presence with the here and now, with the unfolding of time and a locus of space, penetrates more than the mind. It permeates body and spirit and the entire constellation of being. So there's a reason why the original Latin word use of the word genius was in the phrase genius loci, the spirit of a place. We become who we are in the crucible of where we are. Here's a different essay. Our minds, however, are born wanderers, perpetual refugees from presence, perpetually paying for their flight with loneliness. We go on forgetting we're not only embodied creatures, but embodied in the body of the world. We go on forgetting that the here and now, that locus of intimacy with everything and everyone else inhabiting this island of space-time, intimacy with the pulsating totality of our own being, is our only refuge from the existential loneliness that is the price of being alive. Well, so Barry Lopez lived from 1945 to 2020. And he explores in Invitation, one of his essays in this collection here, drawing on his longtime immersion in indigenous cultures and his lifelong travel with Native companions. Lopez counters the hollow stereotype that indigenous people's connection to place is a sort of primitive sensitivity to be contrasted with advanced civilization. Such a dismissive view, as I've come to understand it, ignores the great intangible value that achieving physical intimacy with a place might provide. I'm inclined to point out to someone who condescends to such a desire for intimacy, although it might seem rude, it's not possible for human beings to outgrow loneliness, nor can someone from a culture that condescends to nature easily escape the haunting thought that one's life is meaningless. Existential loneliness and a sense that one's life is inconsequential, both of which are hallmarks of modern civilization, seem to me to derive in part from our abandoning a belief in the therapeutic dimensions of a relationship with a place, a continually refreshed sense of the unplumbable complexity of patterns in the natural world, patterns that are ever present and discernible, and which incorporate the observer and undermine the feeling that one is alone in the world or meaningless in it. The effort to know a place deeply is ultimately an expression of the human desire to belong or to fit somewhere. So this longing to belong with the world is the fulcrum of our yearning for meaning. Whitman knew it when, after his paralytic stroke, he arrived at what makes life worth living. Mary Shelley knew it when, in the wake of her staggering bereavement, she reckoned with what gives meaning to a broken life. And Barry Lopez knows it, locating the cure for our existential loneliness in our intimate relationship to place. The determination to know a particular place, in my experience, is consistently rewarded. Every natural place, to my mind, is open to being known. Somewhere in this process, a person begins to sense that they themselves are becoming known. So when they're absent from that place, they know that place misses them. And this reciprocity, to know and to be known, reinforces a sense that one is necessary in the world. So this question of how our relationship to place deepens our relationship to life permeates this entire book here, this 26 essays. Here's another essay in intimate geography. Intimacy with the physical earth apparently awakens in us, at some wordless level, a primal knowledge of the nature of our emotional as well as our biological attachments to physical landscapes. Based on my own inquiries, my impression is that we experience this primal connection regularly as a diffuse, ineffable pleasure, experience it as the easing of a particular kind of longing. So Barry Lopez is the ultimate modern anti-Cartesian. I think, therefore I am. He's the anti-version of this, reminding us again and again of our creaturely value, interconnected and creaturely nature, interconnected and indivisible. The life of the mind, indivisible from the body, from the life of the body, our portable totalities interleave with the whole of the world. He offers a succinct prescription for remedying the elemental longing pulsating beneath our restlessness and our loneliness. Perhaps the first rule of everything we endeavor to do is to pay attention. Perhaps the second is to be patient. Perhaps the third is to be attentive to to what the body knows. No, could be. Now here's another one. This is, let me get this out of the way. Alexis Deacon. And this is kind of this made-up character here. You see this character here. There are 1,001 ways to feel alien in this world. Some of them blatant, like my legal status in the country to which I devoted my entire adult life is I'm a resident alien. Some of them are subtle. Who hasn't known those days when everything appears to be all right, but the sky of the mind feels profoundly askew? Mostly we go through this world alien to each other. Even with our maximal empathic understanding, the abyss between any two consciousnesses is so immense that it can fit a universe. This awareness is what Nina Simone channeled when she sang, "I wish you could know what it means to be me." On it, Thomas Nagel anchored his iconic unanswerable question of what it is like to be a bat. Self-discovery. Octavio Paz wrote in his superb meditation on otherness, is above all the realization that we are alone. It is the opening of an impalpable, transparent wall, that of our consciousness, between the world and ourselves. The English artist and author Alexis Deacon explores this elemental reality with uncommon tenderness in Bigu. This is Bigu here. Bigu is this whatever. Originally published in 2003, when Deacon himself was only just entering the disordering universe of adulthood after finishing college. So he wrote this book just as he got out of college, with all of the directions. How to live with loneliness. Bigu was not supposed to be here, the story begins. A strange, sweet creature has landed on Earth where no one seems to understand her. She tries to talk to the bunnies, who most look like her, but they wouldn't talk back. She questions the tree stays silent. She talks to the windswept leaves, they wouldn't even stay still to listen. So in her castaway blues, she thinks she can hear her mother calling from afar, but it's only the sound of longing. Feeling woefully alone, Bigu sets out to find some friends, but no one would even stop to regard her. Eventually, she nestles between some newborn puppies in a box left outside an animal shelter and falls asleep. When the human attendant arrives in the morning, he throws the small, strange creature back into the street, unable to fold her strangeness into the scope of his compassionate imagination. So wandering alone through the gray city, Bigu finally finds what seems like the perfect place, a playground full of children who meet her strangeness with delight rather than disdain, and immediately invite her into their games. When the teacher comes, grown and stern, she too takes one look at Bigu and casts her away, and the children cry for their new friend. As a bittersweet parting gift, they give her a red hula hoop, which she takes with her into the austere, lonesome night. The story that ends the way life rarely does. Bigu's parents return with their spaceship and retrieve her. Surrounded once again by love, the infinite lung that makes the atmosphere of loneliness breathable, she gets to tell them about the lonely-making planet she visited, where the creatures are mostly big and unfriendly, but there were some small ones who seemed hopeful. Now we go to Ada Lovelace. Ada Lovelace worked with Babbage, and Babbage built this calculating machine, which was actually viewed by many as the first actual programmable computer. And the programming was done by Ada Lovelace. She was the first programmer of this machine. And in fact, the Defense Department in the United States developed a language which they called Ada. And it is very well-structured language that built on decades of experience, and it's used in a lot of defense systems. I'm not aware that it's used in any commercial systems, but I could be wrong. So Ada Lovelace, this is a picture of her supposedly, but an odd expectation, both hopeful and heedless of logic, minds capable of reaching far beyond the horizon of common imagination should be of common constitution and even emotional topography. We can only ever have the faintest map of another's internal reality. So it's hard enough to reconstitute the mental and emotional landscape of another mind across the abyss of otherness, across the barrier of the Umwelt, even in the present, but it especially hard across the space-time divide of centuries and cultures. And yet something of the fragments that survive, if handled attentively and compassionately enough, can contour that remote bygone reality and yield a fuller picture of personhood than our flat hero myths paint. So Ada Lovelace, who lived from 1815 to 1852, whose uncommon mind catalyzed the age of the algorithm, could reach soaring heights of imagination and plummet to the blackest depths of loneliness. She was ill a lot, headaches, cholera, multiple severe attacks of measles. She practiced her harp religiously as her mind roamed the most abstract regions of thought. She had moments of elated ideation bordering on the mystical, punctuated by plunges into the inkiest regions of being. Syncopations then brushed under the sweeping diagnoses of neurasthenia or hysteria, now most likely identified as bipolar disorder. So she was afflicted with this. Through it all, she understood that creativity was the ability to find points in common between subjects having no very apparent connection, and hence seldom or never brought into juxtaposition, an understanding that came easily to her, for she herself was a walking juxtaposition. 2 centuries of scholars and admirers have tried to reconstruct this complex person from the fragments she left behind. None, in my experience, more richly in dimensionality than James Gleick in his book, The Information, A History, a Theory, a Flood, which remains one of the finest books ever written about how we got to now. Yeah, Gleick is a very good writer, and so this is a very well-written book on information. With an eye to the letter, Ada's delinquent father, the poet Lord Byron, wrote to her forbidding mother, the mathematically gifted Baroness Annabel Milbank, inquiring whether the girl he abandoned was imaginative. So Gleick writes, yes, she was imaginative. She was a prodigy, clever in mathematics, encouraged by tutors, talented in drawing and music, fantastically inventive, profoundly lonely. When she was 12, she set about inventing a means of flying. I'm going to begin my paper wings tomorrow, she wrote to her mother. She hoped to bring the art of flying to very great perfection. I think of writing a book of philology illustrated with plates. For a while, she signed her letters, your very affectionate carrier pigeon. She asked her mother to find a book illustrating bird anatomy because she was reluctant to dissect even a bird. So Ada grew up in a cauldron of control, educated at home by her mother, who was determined to eradicate every strain of her father's dangerous poetical inheritance. She handed out paper tickets to the girl for excelling at her lessons, then confiscated them when Ada did not meet her expectation. If the system of reward and punishment failed to motivate Ada, she was stuffed into a closet until she vowed to do better. There was a deeper punishment being administered in her upbringing, not for something Ada did, but for something she was. This intellectual regimen itself closeted a vast restive part of her, waiting for its powers of expression to be unlatched. She railed at her mother. You will not concede me philosophical poetry. Invert the order. You will give me poetical philosophy or poetical science. She rebelled by claiming it for herself, becoming the first person to marry the mathematical capabilities of computational machines with the poetic possibilities of symbolic logic applied with imagination. The world's first true computer programmer. She also rebelled by developing a romantic infatuation with her tutor, sneaking around the house and garden with him, and making out to the maximum limits of vestigial propriety until their teenage romance was found and the tutor was promptly banished. That spring, dressed in white satin and tulle, she met the king and queen at her official court debut. But the real milestone came a month later when she met a figure far more important to the history of the future, Charles Babbage, brilliant and bushy-browed, curmudgeonly and charming, described by Harper's Monthly as better known to the readers of English newspapers as the persistent opponent of street music. James Gleek writes, with her mother, she went to see what Lady Byron called his thinking machine, the portion of the different engine in his salon. Babbage saw a sparkling, self-possessed young woman with porcelain features and a notorious name, who managed to reveal that she knew more mathematics than most men graduating from university. She saw an imposing 41-year-old, authoritative eyebrows anchoring his strong-boned face, who possessed wit and charm and did not wear these qualities lightly. He seemed a kind of visionary, just what she was seeking. She admired the machines, too. An onlooker reported, while other visitors gazed at the working of this beautiful instrument with a sort of expression, and I dare say the sort of feeling that some savages are said to have shown on first seeing a looking glass or hearing a gun, Miss Byron, young as she was, understood its working and saw the great beauty of the invention. Her feeling for the beauty and abstractions of mathematics, fed only in morsels from her succession of tutors, was overflowing. It had no outlet. A woman could not attend university in England, nor join a scientific society, with two exceptions, the botanical and horticultural. Enraptured by the possibilities that lay hidden in this new generation of machines, Ada was beginning to enjoy her unusual mind in a new way. I find that my plans and ideas keep gaining in clearness and assuming more of the crystalline and less of the nebulous form. At times, in the positive extremes of her emotional polarity, her confidence crested into grandiosity, both terrible and touching. I do not believe that my father was or ever could have been such a poet as I shall be an analyst and metaphysician, for with me, the two go together indissolubly. Like Mary Shelley, Ada Lovelace had waking dreams in which ideas formed in her mind by their own accord, ideas beyond anything she'd been taught, beyond anything teachable. She had the metacognitive awareness that her cognition worked in unusual ways, and the precocious intuition to recognize in Babbage a kindred mind in which she could hone her own.
Is he the one that drew those I guess they were drawings of an atom?
No, that was Babbitt.
Oh, okay. All right.
That was later.
Okay.
With extraordinary self-awareness of both her powers and her limits, which might be called the highest achievement of maturity, she beseeched him to take her on as a pupil, not realizing she was about to become the magnifying lens to which his own vision would bend past the horizon possibility he had envisioned for it. She wrote to Babbage, bearing me in mind, I mean my mathematical interests, is the greatest favor anyone can do me. Perhaps none of us can estimate how great. I am by nature a bit of a philosopher and very great spectator, so that I look on speculator, that I look on through a very immeasurable vista, And though I see nothing but vague and cloudy uncertainty in the foreground of our being, yet I fancy I discern a very bright light a good way further on, and this makes me care much less about the cloudiness and indistinctness which is near. Am I too imaginative for you? I think not. This question of the imagination, the question of the father she never met, but whose portrait she kept under green drapery in her study, both thrilled and troubled her. She felt she had to keep her metaphysical head in order, but she also knew there was a different order of reality yet to be discovered. Mathematics was her supreme plaything of the imagination and the closest thing she knew to magic. I'm often reminded of certain sprites and fairies one reads of, who are at one's elbows in one shape now and the next minute in a form most dissimilar, and uncommonly deceptive, troublesome, and tantalizing are the mathematical sprites and fairies sometime. She longed for the precision of mathematics and the nebula of the imagination. 2 centuries before Bob Dylan observed that we're all wind and dust anyway, and we don't have any proof that we aren't even sitting here, she probed the edges of reality. We talk much of imagination. We talk of the imagination of poets, the imagination of artists, and so forth. I'm inclined to think that in general, we don't know very exactly what we're talking about. It is that which penetrates into the unseen worlds around us, the worlds of science. It is that which feels and discovers what is, the real which we see not, which exists not for our senses. Those who have learned to walk on the threshold of the unknown worlds may then, with the full white wings of imagination, hope to soar further into the unexplored amidst which we live. For her, the imagination was not only a means of escaping from the loneliness, the intense dark moods, the limits of her time and place, but an escape towards something greater, something truer than what the eye could see and the common mind could hold. She recognized she had a peculiar way of learning, allowing the cultural luxury of an ahistorical turn. She recognized her own neurodivergence. There's a Blakean quality, a Joan of Arc spirit in the self-declaration she sent to her mother shortly before her 27th birthday, the closest thing Ada Lovelace ever composed to a personal manifesto. Dearest Mama, I must tell you what my opinion of my own mind and powers is exactly the result of a most accurate study of myself with a view to my future plans during many months. I believe myself to possess a most singular combination of qualities exactly fitted to make me preeminently a discoverer of the hidden realities of nature. You will not mistake this assertion either for wild enthusiasm or for the result of any disposition to self-exaltation. On the contrary, the belief has been forced upon me, and most slow have I been to admit it even. I will mention the 3 remarkable faculties in me which united ought, all in good time, to make me see everything that a being not actually dead can see and know. For it is what we are pleased to call death that will really reveal all things to us. So let's look at these 3 things. Firstly, owing to some peculiarity in my nervous system, I have perceptions of some things which no one else has, or at least very few, if any. This faculty may be designated in me as a singular fact, or some might say an intuitive perception of hidden things, that is, of things hidden from eyes, ears, and the ordinary senses. This alone would advantage me little in the discovery line, but there is, secondly, my immense reasoning faculties. Thirdly, my concentrative faculty, by which I mean the power not only of throwing my whole energy and existence into whatever I choose, but also bringing to bear on any one subject or idea a vast apparatus from all sorts of apparently irrelevant and extraneous sources. I can throw rays from every quarter of the universe into one vast focus. Now, these three powers, I cannot resist the wickedness of calling them my discovering or scientific trinity, are a vast apparatus put into my power by providence, and it rests with me by a proper course during the next 20 years to make the engine what I please. But haste, a restless ambition, would quite ruin the whole. Meantime, my course is so clear and obvious, it's delightful to think how straight it is. And yet what a mountain I have to climb. It's enough to frighten anyone who had not all the most insatiable and restless energy, which from my babyhood has been the plague of your life and my own. So that year, Babbage set out to elaborate on his difference engine in the more complex analytical engine, and their collaboration began in earnest. The rest, as we know, is history. So there you have it. That's a cut on loneliness. Now,
Wow.
Marjorie has, let's see if I can find this. Give me a second. Marjorie has a nice video on Jung. I thought I saved it, so let me see. This isn't it. I'm just looking. Here we go. Oh, this is on creativity now.
Why don't you search for Jung?
Search for Jung. Okay, so
There it is. Oh, well, there's what I sent you.
ooh. Good catch.
I can't believe I saw it.
Now, do I'm going to start from the beginning of the video?
Yeah, I saw it.
Hold on a second, Bruce.
What do I want, not just for survival, but for meaning?
I'm going to go back to the beginning of this.
This is
Oh, wait a moment. Just a sec.
what my house
All
looks
these
like.
ads.
I haven't cleaned in 3 months. That's because I have someone come and do it for me twice a month through.
There's a particular ache that comes with
Is that sped up?
Hold on. Nope.
Play
I'm
that
just going to
again.
put on subtitles though. Okay. I could run it at 1.5 is okay.
Well, we'll be the judge of that. It's kind of fast anyway, I think.
Okay, so hold on, Bruce. Here we go. I don't know, just looking at it. Here we go. Is this it? Share with sound. Yeah, here we go.
With being alone. Not a physical pain, but something deeper, more existential. It feels unnatural, almost like a glitch in the very design of life itself. We are born into a world overflowing with people, and yet many of us find ourselves disconnected, adrift, as if life has quietly turned away from us. The silence becomes oppressive. The stillness can feel like a weight pressing on your chest. And in that quiet, a question begins to surface. Why me? But what if I told you this experience isn't some tragic mistake or cruel punishment? What if being alone, truly alone, was meant to be a crucial chapter in your life, a turning point that leads not to despair, but to awakening? Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, didn't see solitude as something to be feared or pitied. To him, isolation was a sacred space, a necessary condition for genuine self-discovery. In fact, he believed that moments of deep aloneness were not random or meaningless. They were invitations, initiations, portals into a deeper understanding of the self. When you feel like life has isolated you, it's easy to assume you've been forgotten, that others are thriving, laughing, connecting, loving, while you're left behind. It can feel like abandonment. But what Jung understood is that people who are called to a deeper purpose often walk a different path, one that requires solitude, not because they are unworthy of others, but because the noise of the world would only drown out the inner transformation they're meant to undergo. Most people view loneliness as a failure, as a symptom of something being wrong. But from a deeper psychological and spiritual perspective, isolation is often the exact condition needed for profound growth. It's not life rejecting you, it's life preparing you. Think for a moment about the people who have shaped the world, the thinkers, the artists, the spiritual leaders. Their greatness was not born in the middle of crowds or constant connection. It was forged in quiet, in separation, in moments when they had no choice but to look inward. The Buddha sat in solitude beneath the Bodhi tree. Jesus wandered the desert for 40 days. Jung himself retreated into deep reflection, documenting his inner experiences in the famous Red Book, a journal of spiritual and psychological awakening. These were not passive retreats, they were deliberate confrontations with the self. Why is this necessary? Because transformation rarely happens in comfort. You don't evolve when you're surrounded by distractions. True change occurs in silence, in discomfort, in the confrontation between who you think you are and who you truly are beneath the layers. If you find yourself in a season of isolation, consider this. Perhaps you're being prepared. Prepared for something that can only be discovered in the absence of noise, something powerful and uniquely yours. But here's the truth. Most people won't make it through. They won't endure the loneliness long enough to uncover its purpose. Instead, they interpret it as rejection. They spiral into despair, convinced they are unwanted, unworthy, unloved. And this illusion is the real danger of isolation. The loneliness is not what breaks people. It's the belief that it will last forever, that there is no meaning in it. But Jung would argue that this is the greatest misunderstanding of all. Solitude is not a curse. It's a mirror, and within that mirror lies your truest reflection, if only you are brave enough to look. When the distractions fade, the social media feeds, the casual conversations, the constant motion, you are left face to face with yourself. Your mind grows louder. Thoughts that have long been buried begin to rise. Insecurities you've ignored become deafening. Regrets you've suppressed bubble up like ghosts. It can feel like drowning in your own mind. This is where most people try to escape. They run back to distractions, reach for their phones, dive into new relationships, surround themselves with noise. But those who remain, who stay in that silence and face what they've been avoiding, they begin a journey Jung called individuation.
Oh my God, Mom, look how pretty you are. Okay, so this is my mom.
Individuation is the process of becoming fully yourself, not the version of you that was shaped by expectations, by culture, by family, but the raw, authentic self buried underneath it all. It's not a comfortable process. In fact, it can be agonizing, but it is necessary. Most people live as fragments. Their identities are borrowed, shaped by what others want, by who society says they should be. But in solitude, those influences fall away. What remains is the unfiltered you, and that is both terrifying and liberating. The reason solitude can be so painful is because it forces you to confront the truth. Maybe the life you've built isn't really yours. Maybe the person you've been isn't your real self, and without the external noise, your subconscious begins to whisper. Then shout, and finally demand your attention. But again, this is not punishment, it's purification. The pain is not senseless, it's sacred. It burns away illusion, it clears the fog, it strips away everything that is not truly you. And, in its place, something new begins to emerge. Still, many people reject this process. Instead of seeing solitude as an opportunity, they see it as a failure. They convince themselves they've been left behind. They feel cursed. They fall into bitterness. They waste this rare opportunity by trying to escape it, rather than listening to what it's trying to reveal. But Jung had a warning for those who cling to suffering. Don't identify with it. Don't build your identity around pain. Yes, pain is a teacher, but it's not meant to be your home. You're supposed to learn from it, not live in it. The more you resist the silence, the more it controls you. But when you embrace it, lean into it, sit with it, something incredible happens. You start to hear your true voice beneath all the noise. The ones who emerge from solitude changed, stronger, wiser, more self-aware, are not the ones who fought it. They are the ones who surrendered to it, who used the time to reflect, to unlearn, and to remember who they were before the world told them who to be. And this is why isolation, though it feels like emptiness, is in truth a sacred threshold. A passage, a trial by fire. Not everyone will cross it, but those who do will never be the same. When you are finally alone, truly and undeniably alone, you enter a kind of psychological wilderness. There are no signposts, no familiar distractions, no one clapping for your efforts or offering you a map. You are left with only yourself. And this, while terrifying, is exactly the point. Solitude strips away the noise of the world, so you can hear what has always been speaking inside you, your true self. It is the only space where you can begin to ask the questions that matter. Who am I, beyond the roles I play? What do I believe, apart from what I've been taught? What do I want, not just for survival, but for meaning? Carl Jung believed that the unconscious mind, the hidden reservoir of our desires, fears, instincts, and forgotten truths, becomes more accessible when we are removed from external influence. In the quiet, the unconscious speaks more clearly, not in words, but in feelings, dreams, memories, and sudden insights that seem to rise from nowhere. These are not random. They are messages, clues from your deeper self. In society, we're often encouraged to keep moving, to stay busy, to avoid the discomfort of stillness. But true transformation requires that you stop, you pause, you feel, and you listen, even when what you hear scares you. This is the alchemy of solitude, the slow, mysterious process of turning silence into selfhood. It's not immediate. It doesn't happen in a single epiphany. It unfolds gradually, like a seed pushing through the soil. First there is darkness, then pressure, then something stirs, something begins to grow, but it requires your cooperation. If you fight the solitude, if you numb it or run from it, the transformation cannot happen. You remain stuck in a loop, repeating old patterns, clinging to surface identities, afraid to face the depth of who you really are. Jung's idea of shadow work becomes essential here. The shadow is everything we've pushed away about ourselves, traits we dislike, emotions we suppress, truths we pretend not to know. These parts of us don't disappear. They wait in the dark. And when we enter solitude, the shadow steps forward. You might feel anger you didn't know you were holding, sadness you've kept locked away for years, guilt, envy, fear. It can be overwhelming, but Jung taught that integrating the shadow, making peace with these parts instead of denying them, is the key to wholeness. So solitude, if embraced with courage, becomes the arena where this integration takes place. You begin to reclaim yourself, piece by piece, painfully, powerfully. Most people think happiness comes from avoiding pain, but Jung understood that real peace comes from understanding it, from facing it, from no longer being afraid of the darker aspects of your psyche. Because when you can sit with your pain, listen to it, learn from it, it loses its power to control you. And something remarkable begins to happen. Clarity emerges. You start to see which relationships were built on fear or obligation. You recognize the ways you've abandoned yourself to please others. You notice how you've been performing instead of living, and you begin to reclaim your life, not the life others expected from you, but the one that feels authentically yours. This is the kind of freedom solitude offers. It doesn't come quickly, it doesn't come easily, but it comes honestly. In this quiet space, you may rediscover passions that once lit you up before the world told you they weren't practical. You may hear your inner child, not the wounded one, but the curious, playful, creative one, whispering again. You may remember dreams you left behind because they didn't fit the mold, and suddenly those dreams don't feel so impossible anymore. They feel necessary. The tragedy is that most people will never reach this depth. They'll skim the surface of their own lives. They'll avoid solitude at all costs, mistaking it for loneliness, missing the treasure buried just beneath the discomfort. But if you've been brought into solitude, even against your will, consider that life may be offering you something greater than comfort. It may be offering you truth, and truth is not always soft or easy to digest. It cuts, it exposes, it demands change. But it also liberates. It clears away the false to make room for the real. That's why people who come out the other side of solitude often radiate a different kind of strength. It's not loud or aggressive. It's quiet, rooted, unshakable. They no longer seek validation from others because they've learned how to validate themselves. They are not desperate for attention because they've made peace with being unseen. And they don't fear being misunderstood. They'd rather be authentic than approved. This is the gift of solitude. It gives you back to yourself, but it's not a gift that's handed to you. You have to earn it. You have to sit through the nights when the silence feels like it will crush you. You have to face the thoughts that haunt you. You have to cry, sometimes rage, sometimes break open. And then, only then.
Do you have old pictures on your PC or smartphone? Then this video is for you. Nobody believed me at first, but now everybody.
Something new begins to take shape inside you, a stronger you, a clearer you. Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. But those who do face themselves, not just once, but repeatedly, with honesty and humility, they become something rare in this world. They become whole. So if you find yourself in a season of solitude, don't rush to escape it. Don't fill it with noise. Don't numb it with distraction. Instead, listen, feel, breathe. Trust that this space, as empty as it seems, is fertile ground for something extraordinary to grow, something no one else can give you, a deep, unshakable relationship with yourself. Because in the end, that's what solitude is really about. Not isolation, not punishment, but reunion with the self you were always meant to become. There is a kind of sacred fire hidden within solitude. One that burns not to destroy you, but to refine you. It is uncomfortable, yes. At times it can feel like punishment. But the truth is, solitude is a crucible, and only those willing to step into its heat will emerge transformed. When everything familiar has been stripped away, the voices of others, the distractions, the roles you used to play, something raw and honest remains. You, Not the version others see, not the one you've curated for the world, but the unfiltered, vulnerable, quietly powerful self that has been waiting for space to breathe. Jung saw this kind of experience not as a detour from life, but as the very heart of it. He believed that life itself pushes us again and again into encounters with our unconscious mind, that vast inner world filled with dreams, fears, instincts, and forgotten truths. But the door to that world rarely opens in noise. It opens in silence, in solitude, in those moments when you feel forgotten by the world, when the invitations stop coming, when your phone stays silent and the stillness feels suffocating. That's when you are closest to something sacred. It might not feel like a gift at first. It might feel like grief. But beneath the ache is an invitation to become something more whole, more honest, more aligned with your essence. Many people view isolation through a purely negative lens. It's seen as social failure, as being unwanted. But solitude, especially the kind that comes uninvited, often signals the beginning of an inner rite of passage, one that the soul requires, even if the ego resists. Think of it like the seasons. No one questions the purpose of winter. It's a time when everything appears still, even dead. And yet, underground, roots are growing, deepening, preparing for the next cycle of growth. Your solitude is no different. On the surface, nothing may seem to be happening, but internally, massive shifts are underway. This is why spiritual traditions across the world, from Buddhism to mystic Christianity to Sufism, all place such reverence on periods of isolation. In silence, in retreat, the soul finds its way home. But make no mistake, this is not a passive experience. You do not simply sit in silence and wait for revelation. You must engage with yourself, actively, compassionately, and honestly. You must listen to what you've ignored. You must feel what you've numbed. You must sit with the ache, not as a victim, but as a seeker. And in doing so, something profound begins to shift. The parts of yourself you once rejected, your fears, your past mistakes, your perceived flaws, begin to feel less like enemies and more like messengers. You realize that these shadows you've spent a lifetime avoiding were never trying to destroy you. They were trying to guide you back to your wholeness. This is the essence of Jung's concept of individuation, the process of integrating all the parts of yourself, including the ones you've pushed away. The goal is not perfection, but unity. To become a fully formed individual is to stand in your contradictions, your light and your shadow, and say, "This is me, entire, undivided." And that kind of self-acceptance rarely happens in the company of others. It requires solitude. It requires discomfort. It requires fire. We live in a culture that tells us to avoid discomfort at all costs, that pain is a sign something is wrong, and that healing must be quick, clean, and painless. But real healing, the kind that reshapes your soul, is messy. It's full of grief and rage and unexpected beauty. It cannot be rushed. It must be honored, and that's what solitude teaches you if you let it. Patience, presence, depth. In solitude, time slows down. You are no longer sprinting through your days, checking boxes and chasing validation. Instead, you begin to notice things, your breath, your thoughts, the subtleties of your own emotions. You become aware of how much noise you've been living with, and you start to feel, perhaps for the first time in years, what it's like to truly be with yourself. This presence is what makes transformation possible. It's in this quiet space that you begin to forgive, not just others, but yourself. You start to let go of the stories that have kept you stuck. I'm not enough. I'm too broken. No one will ever understand me. These narratives lose their grip when you sit with them long enough to see through them. You also begin to dream again, not just of achievements, but of meaning. You ask bigger questions. What does a meaningful life look like for me? What kind of presence do I want to bring into the world? Who am I when no one is watching? And in answering these questions, you begin to rewrite the script of your life, not based on expectations, but on truth, your truth. Solitude gives you that chance to come home to yourself, to remember what matters, to realign with what feels real, not just what looks good. But make no mistake, this is sacred work, and it's not for the faint of heart. That's why not everyone embraces it. Many will spend their whole lives running from themselves, from the silence, from the pain that lives just beneath the surface. They'll fill their time with noise, their hearts with half connections, their minds with distraction. But the ones who stop running, who sit down in the fire and let it do its work, they become something rare. They become grounded, rooted, free. They're not perfect. They still feel pain. They still long for connection, but they carry something others don't. A deep inner stability, born not from avoiding life's hardships, but from walking through them with open eyes and a willing heart. This is the alchemy of solitude. Not a punishment, but a passage. A stripping away of the false, a refinement of the soul. And once you've passed through it, you carry the wisdom of fire. You become a lighthouse, steady, silent, and unmistakably alive. There comes a moment.
Lowe's and Home Depot both can't stand when you do this, but there's nothing they can do to stop you.
Something.
Often subtle, rarely loud, when the season of solitude begins to shift. You may not notice it at first. There's no thunderclap, no angel whispering. You've completed your inner work, but you feel it. Quietly, something has changed inside you. The silence that once felt suffocating now feels sacred. The loneliness that used to ache now feels like peace. You've made it through the fire. But what happens next? Many people assume that once you've faced yourself in solitude, you simply return to the world as before, back to routines, to relationships, to the life you left behind. But the truth is, you don't return as the same person, and the world doesn't greet you in the same way. You've been changed. And now, the real test begins, integrating your inner transformation into the external world. Carl Jung understood this phase well. He believed that individuation, the deep psychological process of becoming your whole, authentic self, wasn't complete until you brought your truth back into the world. Transformation that stays locked inside the mind or heart isn't transformation at all. It must be lived, and this is no easy task. When you've gone deep within yourself, your values often shift. The things that once excited you may now feel hollow. Relationships you once clung to may now feel misaligned. Activities that used to fill your calendar may seem meaningless. You begin to crave depth, sincerity, and purpose. At first, this dissonance can be disorienting. You may feel like a stranger in your own life. People may notice your change and not know how to respond. Some may celebrate you. Others may resist, trying to pull you back into old patterns. But the one thing you must remember is this: your growth is real, and it matters. You don't owe the world the version of you that no longer exists. The return from solitude is not about fitting in. It's about showing up, authentically, fully, without apology. That doesn't mean you shout your transformation from the rooftops. Often the most powerful shifts are quiet, grounded, rooted in your actions, not just your words. You begin to move through life with more intention. You speak less, but with more meaning. You choose relationships not out of fear or loneliness, but from a place of alignment. You learn to say no, not out of defensiveness, but because your boundaries have become sacred. You no longer abandon yourself for approval. You've learned how to stand beside yourself, and that loyalty becomes unshakable. This inner strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention, but it's unmistakable. People can sense it. They feel it in your presence, in your silence, in the way you hold space for others without losing yourself in the process, and slowly you begin to attract what truly aligns with who you've become. New relationships enter your life, ones based not on performance or people-pleasing, but on mutual respect and authenticity. Opportunities arise that resonate with your deeper values. Your outer world begins to reflect your inner truth. Not instantly, and not without challenge, but steadily. And when difficulties arise, and they will, you face them differently. You no longer see discomfort as a threat. You've sat with your shadow. You've befriended your solitude. You know how to return to yourself. That's your power. In many ways, solitude teaches you how to be your own home. And when you carry that kind of inner rootedness, the world can't shake you in the same way. Rejection stings less. Failure feels more like feedback than condemnation. Silence doesn't scare you anymore. You've learned how to speak to yourself in it. But perhaps the most beautiful part of returning from solitude is that you now carry something others desperately need: presence. In a world addicted to noise, speed, and superficial connection, a person who has been shaped by solitude brings a rare kind of calm. You're no longer trying to impress. You're not chasing approval. You're not proving your worth, because you've already found it alone in the dark. And this presence becomes a gift. You begin to notice when others are in pain, even if they hide it well. You listen differently, not waiting for your turn to speak, but truly hearing. You ask deeper questions. You offer space, not solutions. And without even trying, you become a mirror for others, a reminder that they too have an inner life waiting to be heard. This is how solitude becomes service. Not because you preach what you've learned, but because you embody it. Your stillness becomes medicine, your truth becomes a quiet light. And without forcing it, you give others permission to pause, to go inward, to heal. But even as you begin to serve others in this new way, you don't forget your solitude. You return to it often, not out of sadness, but out of reverence. It becomes a practice, a sanctuary, a place to recalibrate when the noise creeps back in, because growth doesn't stop. The path of self-discovery is never finished. There will always be more to uncover, more to release, more to reclaim. But now you know the way. You've walked through the fire and survived. You've sat in silence and heard your soul speak. And that memory lives inside you, a compass, always pointing you back to what matters. Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. And now you are awake, not in the dramatic, flashy way the world romanticizes, but in a steady, grounded way. You know what peace feels like because you've earned it. You know what self-respect tastes like because you've built it. And you know that you can stand alone, not because you have to, but because you've learned how to. And so you walk through the world differently, not separate from it, but not consumed by it either. You carry your solitude with you, not as a wound, but as a source of wisdom. You belong to yourself now, and from that place everything changes. Because the real gift of solitude isn't escape, it's embodiment. It's the realization that you were never broken, never behind, never forgotten. You were simply being carved into something deeper. Now, you are ready. Not to go back to who you were, but to move forward as who you've become.
Hey, listen, did you know there's
Huge demand
Oops.
for new voice
Hold on a
talent.
second.
The same old voice actors and
Hold on, I got
celebrities can't record everything.
There we go.
'Cause
Okay.
The perfect example of what he's talking about.
So Young practiced that. He basically every day for years, when he was doing the Red Book, he was completely, by himself, and this is what worked for him.
He spent hours every day in a sandbox, literally a sandbox in his garden. Sometimes playing with toys and, digging and making patterns. He would do these sand paintings, like spirals and meditative mandalas and things in sand. And it was an incredibly rich period of his life that I think if he had handled it differently, might have just been a disintegration. It's what we think of as a breakdown is often just is some kind of a breakdown of the ego. And we see that as a negative thing because that's the vehicle that we're familiar with. But it can be a breakthrough, I think, to a deeper level, which it was for him.
Yeah.
This got me thinking a lot about how different people have handled the pandemic in the last few years. For me, it was really welcome. We went for walks. We started going for walks at the beach every day. And the four of us as a family started doing things together. We brought my brother home from state care where he was considered to be completely nonverbal. And that was okay with me. I'm glad he's begun talking. I hope it is liberating for him. But we got to a much quieter place, of spending more time just with the immediate family, and by ourselves and in solitude and reading and doing this class. And that I don't think I would have been able to enter into without years of a lot of solitude in my life. When I lived in New York, I said I was the urban hermit. And I became more sociable living in Connecticut. It's funny.
COVID,
Yeah.
a lot of people were lonely during COVID. They were by themselves.
Right.
And it was just a horrifying experience for a lot of people. But for me, it was a relief. It was more like a time in. Okay, let's not do this during.
Yeah, that looks good.
So
Well,
I think we would have been as prepared to bring my brother home as we actually have been. And spending time with him is different from spending it with other people. But I don't mind it. I welcome it. People are saying, well, it's almost kind of strange to be able to be comfortable with somebody who's autistic and nonverbal and live with him. But he's always been himself. And I was always comfortable with that. And it is different, but he has different ways of communicating and expressing himself. And I think we have different ways of knowing what we're feeling and up to. I don't know how to put it. But I think it's changed our relationship and that we were both ready for a relationship that we wouldn't have been ready for. And COVID, we really came together during COVID. And didn't really know each other. We had been acquaintances for 20 years, but we didn't really know each other. And then all of a sudden we were living together, not fully, but under one roof. Because it was a question of safety. And and then we were, kind of seeking safe harbor from other things in our lives at the same time that we were supporting one another, and then but it all kind of came together in this conducive way that I realized was precious. It was really a gift. And I think we'll come out the other side in a very different, as just as it was just described, in a very different way.
He just had his 65th birthday and he just started talking.
Oh, wow.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Wow. Amazing.
So
That process that Carl Jung was talking about is studied and understood in Buddhism. There's like 16 stages of insight. It's all very well understood and different phases. But the type of meditation is very deep. Anyway.
Well, I think he would say, and I would agree, it is a phenomenon of layers, and you're going deeper and deeper into, I think, the universal, whatever we want to say, human and collective unconscious, that's less well, just as that video just put it, it's less and less about outer appearances and expectations. And so in a way, it's more and more individual, but in another way, it's more and more universal. And it's just, to sound trite, this kind of isness, that is just there. And you're just in it and with it. And so for me to be with somebody nonverbal, it was a part of it, it enhanced it.
but what Jung was saying about his individuation, there Stephen's coming into his own as his own person, but it's a different path for him than for us. So,
but I find it's expanding my frame of reference for experience to be with somebody, as they say, neurodivergent, who's in such a different reality than the one that we're familiar with,
right.
and blossoming in his own way. And I think it's difficult at times for him because it's unfamiliar. He can't really go back, and he's not quite ready to go forward. He's in this in-between place, and it's unfamiliar. But he's with 3 people who talk a lot now, and it's this 3-to-1 ratio that I think is supporting his growth. We almost got together with some of his former housemates for his birthday, and it didn't work out, so we'll try to reschedule something soon. I think his immune system is strong enough now that we can do that, but it might be painful for him, because he's changing so much. That he's different.
And he
in
spent
ways.
decades with these people,
Right.
too. So
They were really his second family. So it's all an unknown. But for me, I spent a lot of time not deliberately not being in one-to-one significant relationship. I just felt like I needed to purge myself of that. I think I was kind of a relationship junkie when I was young, in my teens and 20s. And I wouldn't have been ready for a relationship that I have with Bart without, well, I think I took care of my mother after a stroke for, 7 or 8 years. And that whole experience and the whole legal thing since then, and Bart's had a legal nightmare. It changed me and prepared me in a way that I don't think anything else could. And I think there's a certain kind of growth we can only have in solitude, as this video attests. But then when you come back to life and it's not all in solitude for me in a spiritual partnership, which I always wanted. There's a kind of growth you can only have in relationship too. Because the solitude is so self-referential. I think I grew in ways I never would have if I hadn't done that. And it's important, and it prepared me for the growth I can have now, but I couldn't have the growth I'm having now in that solitude. So I I wonder about that for the clerics, although they have, their own other relationships and relationship with the divine and so on, but I think it's to me a really interesting subject.
Yeah. It's different. Figured we'd try something different.
So for someone who feels there's no self, how did it strike you, Bruce?
Well, I mean, it's an ongoing issue for a lot of people. I mean, the thing is that in my life, I'm telepathic, and I recall experiences from previous lives. So it's sort of, I mean, you are alone technically for sure, but there's other dimensions that open up that kind of expand everything in terms of insight and understanding what's really there.
Right.
But a lot of that comes from meditation, Like I did some very serious meditation for quite a long years, and that changes everything.
Are you going to be going off this summer for a stint?
No, I don't think so. My wife has plans, but we're still working on it.
Well,
Well, thank you for
thank you.
coming up with this subject, Bart. It was rich.
It's different. Who knows where it'll take us? Anyway, we'll see if we're here next week, Bruce.
All right.
Another week.
See if you're in
Have
the
a
same
good-
house.
We may have a different backdrop next
Yeah.
week.
Okay, well, good luck.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good to see you.